In the pink granite of far southern Egypt, a single colossal stone lies half-born from the ground. It is an obelisk, longer than a swimming pool and heavier than a temple, still fused to the bedrock it was carved from more than 3,000 years ago. The ancient masons shaped it, smoothed its sides, and then, with the end almost in sight, they abandoned it and left it forever. It is the greatest obelisk the Egyptians ever tried to raise, and it never stood at all. Welcome to the Unfinished Obelisk of Aswan. We are at Aswan in the far south of Egypt, where the Nile narrows against low hills of hard stone at the edge of the desert. This was the frontier of ancient Egypt, the gateway to Nubia and Africa beyond. Here lie the great granite quarries of Aswan, the source of much of the fine hard stone that the Egyptians floated down the Nile to build their temples, their statues, and their tombs across the whole of the land. And here, in one of those quarries, the largest obelisk of all still rests where it was cut. The first thing that strikes you is that the obelisk is not lying on the ground. It is still part of the ground. 3 of its 4 long sides were carved free, but the underside was never cut loose, so the giant remains attached to the living rock beneath it, like a ship still held in its slipway. All around it, the quarry floor has been chiseled away to reveal the shape, a smooth, immense shaft rising out of the rough granite. To stand beside it is to see a monument frozen in the very act of being made. The obelisk was born of Aswan itself, of the beautiful rose-colored granite that the hills here are made of. For thousands of years, this was one of the most prized quarries in the ancient world. From these outcrops, the Egyptians drew the stone for towering obelisks, for the great seated statues of their kings, and for the polished sarcophagi that would hold them in death. The stone was hard, durable, and touched with pink and gray, and once shaped and polished, it seemed to hold the light. From this one place, monuments spread out across an entire civilization. But what exactly is an obelisk, and why carve something so impossibly large? To the Egyptians, an obelisk was a ray of sunlight turned to stone, a tall tapering shaft crowned with a small pyramid at its peak. They were raised in pairs before the great gateways of temples, standing guard at the threshold like frozen beams of light. Each was cut from a single unbroken block, a technical feat that few other peoples ever dared. They were among the proudest achievements a pharaoh could leave behind, and each one was a prayer to the sun made permanent. And these were monuments to the sun god above all. The pyramid-shaped tip of each obelisk was often sheathed in gold or in electrum, a bright blend of gold and silver, so that it would blaze at dawn and dusk when the first and last light struck it. Rising high above the temple walls, a gilded obelisk turned the whole monument into a beacon, catching the sun and returning it to the god who sent it. To the Egyptians, these shining points were where the divine light of the sun came down to touch the earth. The Aswan obelisk was an ambition beyond all the others. Where earlier obelisks already strained the limits of what could be carved and moved, this one was conceived on a scale that dwarfs them all. The masons marked out its outline on the surface of the bedrock, and began the slow, patient work of freeing a single flawless shaft of granite larger than anything raised before. It was to be the crowning obelisk of its age, a stone so vast that its very existence was a declaration of power. Everything about it reached for the impossible. And then the stone betrayed them. As the carving went deep, long cracks appeared in the granite, splitting through the body of the obelisk. Once the flaw ran through it, the shaft could never be raised whole, for it would have broken under its own colossal weight. All the months of labor, all the ambition poured into it, came to nothing in an instant. The masons abandoned the giant where it lay, leaving it half-freed in the quarry, and turned their tools to other work. The greatest obelisk of Egypt was defeated by a hidden weakness in the rock. Had it been finished, it would have been staggering. Rising more than 40 meters into the sky, taller than a 10-story building, and weighing on the order of 1,000 tons, it would have been the largest obelisk ever raised in ancient Egypt, far heavier than any that stands today. No obelisk before or since came close to this scale. It would have towered over the temple it was made for, a single unbroken finger of granite pointing at the sun. Even lying broken in the ground, its sheer size still stops visitors in their tracks. This immense ambition is often linked to one of Egypt's most remarkable rulers, the female pharaoh Hatshepsut. She was a king in all but name, who raised some of the tallest obelisks that still stand and who filled her reign with monuments of extraordinary scale. Whether or not this particular giant was hers, it belongs to that same age of soaring ambition, when rulers competed to raise ever greater shafts of stone to the sun. The unfinished obelisk is a monument to that reach, and to the moment when even Egypt's confidence met a limit it could not pass. And yet in its failure, the obelisk gives us something no finished monument ever could. Because it was left exactly where it was being made, it is a window into how the ancient Egyptians actually quarried granite. Every finished obelisk was carried away and polished smooth, erasing all trace of how it was born. But here the whole workshop lies frozen, the outline on the rock, the channels cut around the shaft, the raw surfaces still rough from the tools. It is the clearest record anywhere of the greatest stone working craft of the ancient world. The method it reveals is astonishing in its patience. To free granite this hard, the Egyptians had no iron tools that could cut it. Instead, they used balls of dolerite, an even harder dark stone, pounding the granite by hand, blow after blow, hour after hour, to crush narrow trenches around the shaft. The marks of this labor are still visible in the quarry, rows of scooped hollows carved by nothing more than harder stone and endless human effort. It was slow beyond imagining, and it worked, grinding a mountain of granite into the shape of a sacred monument. Even to free such a stone was only half the challenge. Somehow the finished obelisks had to be lifted from the quarry, moved to the banks of the Nile, floated hundreds of miles downriver on great barges, and then raised upright at the temple gates. Exactly how the Egyptians stood these giants on end, with the tools of their age, is still not fully understood and remains one of the enduring mysteries of their engineering. That they did it again and again, with stones weighing hundreds of tons, is one of the quiet wonders of the ancient world. And so this failed giant became something its makers never intended, a teacher. A finished obelisk speaks of triumph and hides its secrets. This unfinished one speaks of the struggle behind the triumph, of ambition, of patient labor, and of the moment when even the mightiest effort meets a flaw it cannot overcome. It is a rare thing, a monument to the work itself rather than to a king, left open in the rock for anyone who comes to read. In its very incompleteness, it tells a fuller story than any polished shaft ever could. While its finished cousins were scattered to temples across Egypt and in later ages, carried off to distant cities around the world, this one stone never left home. It stayed exactly where it was cut, in the granite hills above the Nile, for more than 3,000 years. Travelers and scholars have long come to marvel at it, this immense shaft still half wedded to the earth. Of all the obelisks Egypt ever made, the one that never rose may be the most eloquent of them all, precisely because it stayed. A colossus locked in the bedrock, the rose granite of Aswan, and the greatest obelisk that never stood. Thank you for watching. Follow for more interesting people, places, and things we cover on the channel.